Zorak's eyes remained fixed on the Earth's surface as the signal from Endurance flickered on his command console. The humans, so far beneath his race in terms of technology, had issued no threats, only a strange willingness to engage. He had anticipated an immediate show of force, an act of submission. But instead, the message was polite. Zorak let out a low hum of irritation. "They think we are here to negotiate," he muttered, his voice tinged with disdain. "I'll teach them their place." Zero's multifaceted gaze studied the human communication for a long moment. "Perhaps they simply don't understand the extent of our power, Captain. They've never faced a species like ours before." Zorak chuckled, the sound a rasping ripple through the chamber. "Let them keep their false bravado. I'll show them how easily their fragile little station can be destroyed. Bring up their most important facilities. Let's see how well their primitive tools work against our advanced weapons." On the Oblivion, systems hummed as energy began to charge, the deep rumble of power building beneath Zorak's feet. Outside, the alien fleet began to shift position, realigning their weapons and preparing for an attack. The Eloreth believed in overwhelming force. Everything about their civilization was designed around annihilation. They were not accustomed to delay, to negotiation. Humanity was beneath them, and this first interaction would be swift. But then, the Eloreth sensors, sophisticated and precise, began to pick up a faint anomaly. Zorak's face twisted in confusion. "What is that?" "A fluctuation in our scan." A technician nearby flinched as he read the data again. "Captain, it's not a signal. It's a pattern. A disruption. Small, almost imperceptible, but it's coming from the human station." Zorak stood straighter, his many eyes narrowing. "Explain." The technician hesitated before speaking. "It's the human toolkits. They're using the simplest devices, tools we would consider useless. Wrenches, hammers. But they are emitting signals that interact with our systems." "Impossible," Zorak growled. "How could a hammer, of all things, interfere with our technology?" But the data didn't lie. A wrench, used by one of the human technicians, was producing a faint, high-frequency pulse. Another technician's screwdriver was sending tiny but consistent signals, almost like they were disrupting the alien systems. Zorak's mind raced. This shouldn't be happening. "This is no accident," Zorak muttered, the first seed of doubt creeping into his thoughts. "They're tools. They're not just primitive. They're evolving, adapting." He turned sharply to Zero. "Ready the command fleet. We'll proceed with the demonstration. But this time, we'll do it carefully." A shiver ran through Zorak's cold alien bones. The humans' tools may have been simple, but perhaps the greatest danger wasn't in their technology. Perhaps the true threat lay in their ability to adapt the most mundane objects into something far more deadly. The Eloreth fleet had established a direct channel with Earth's government, demanding a formal meeting to discuss humanity's integration into the greater galactic community. The leaders of Earth, though intimidated by the Eloreth's advanced technology, agreed to a peaceful negotiation. At the request of the Eloreth, the meeting would take place on Endurance, the largest human space station, which orbited just beyond Earth's atmosphere. Captain Zorak and his retinue of elite soldiers descended from the Oblivion, landing aboard the station with the sleek, almost liquid grace of their species. The human leaders greeted them in the main docking bay, a tension-filled silence hanging in the air. Zorak, flanked by his crew, assessed the humans carefully. Despite their technological inferiority, they showed no signs of fear. If anything, they seemed almost bored. Dr. Emily Rios, the chief engineer of Endurance, stood in the front of the human delegation, her arms crossed in front of her. "Welcome to Endurance," she said coolly, offering a firm handshake to Zorak, who responded with a shallow nod, his many eyes gleaming with curiosity. "We understand that you're here to offer us." She paused for a moment, searching for the right word. "Help." Zorak raised a brow, scanning her attire. a utilitarian jumpsuit, smudged with grease and the telltale signs of a hard day's work. At her waist, a basic toolkit was clipped, tools hanging from it like a badge of honor. His eyes flickered to the others, each one of them similarly equipped. The humans were so casual about it. Zorak found it both perplexing and irritating. These primitive creatures, so proud of their so-called tools, didn't realize they were standing at the edge of their extinction. "Yes, help," Zorak replied, his voice smooth, but edged with the weight of his race's superiority. "We have come to offer you advancement, to guide your species into a new era. We offer you technology, power, stability, and knowledge." Emily Rio's eyes didn't betray the slightest hint of awe. Instead, she just nodded. "I'm sure we can discuss that. But first, I need to check a few things with the systems, if you'll excuse me." Zorak blinked in surprise, his 4 sets of eyes narrowing, as Rios turned and began walking toward a nearby console. She was dismissing him. His pride flared, but he suppressed the instinct to react. "Go on," he said tightly, his voice strained with forced politeness. "But make it quick. We don't have all day." Rios didn't look back, but her voice came over her shoulder as she continued working. "No problem. We're just making some adjustments to the station's cooling system. Nothing too difficult." Zorak's gaze followed her movements. Emily didn't need advanced alien tools to complete her task. A simple wrench in her hand was all she needed to access the delicate systems and bypass security protocols. He watched as she worked, carefully but quickly, tightening bolts, twisting pipes, and using what looked like a manual screwdriver to recalibrate a reactor gauge. The entire time, Zorak could feel the faint hum of something beneath the surface, an undercurrent of competence. One of the Eloreth soldiers beside him raised an eyebrow and spoke in a hushed tone. "Captain, are you seeing this? Her movements. It's as if she's not just repairing, but understanding the system, reprogramming it." Zorak frowned, his curiosity piqued. The technician had not just been fixing things. She was improvising, adapting, transforming a basic tool into an extension of her own understanding. The wrench in her hands wasn't just a device to tighten bolts. It was a weapon, a tool of problem-solving that Zorak couldn't yet grasp. "Why doesn't she use our technology?" Zorak muttered to himself. "Doesn't she know the power of what we could offer them?" The realization hit him like a bolt from the blue. These humans weren't just using their tools. They were thinking with them, bending them to their will in ways the Eloreth never imagined. And as Emily finished her work, she looked up and smiled as the systems began to hum back to life. "Done," she said, as if she had just completed some routine task. Zorak stood in stunned silence, suddenly aware that for the first time, he was the one being outwitted. Captain Zorak's mind buzzed with confusion as he watched Emily Rios finish her work. The human engineer, with nothing more than a basic toolkit, wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers, had just outwitted him. He had expected the humans to tremble before his superior technology, but instead, they seemed unfazed, almost dismissive. It wasn't just their casual attitude toward their tools that bothered him. It was the sheer competence they displayed using them, the way they turned their simple, primitive objects into something far greater. As Emily stepped away from the console, she wiped a smear of grease from her brow, unbothered by the fact that she had just completed a task that would have taken the Eloreth engineers hours to figure out. Zorak's eyes narrowed, his suspicion deepening. "What is it about these tools?" "Zero," Zorak said, his voice clipped. "Analyze the human toolkit. I want a complete breakdown. Their methods don't make sense. These tools, how are they affecting our systems?" Zero immediately sprang to action, sending out a series of scanning beams, his silvery form moving quickly as his sensors processed the data. As he worked, Zorak turned his attention back to Emily, who was now speaking with her fellow engineers. They were laughing, exchanging stories, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. She still carried her toolkit at her side, something that looked almost archaic by Eloreth standards, yet it seemed to grant her a unique authority here. Zorak's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp beep. "Captain," Zero said, his voice laced with intrigue. "I've isolated the signal. It's faint, but it's there. The humans' tools, when used in proximity to our systems, are causing minute disruptions. At first, I thought it was just interference, but now I believe it's more intentional." Zorak turned to face his second-in-command. "Explain." "These tools, they are not just mechanical," Zero continued. "They seem to be emitting a frequency, a resonance, almost like a form of low-level electromagnetic pulse. It's not powerful enough to damage our systems directly, but it's enough to cause fluctuations, small ones, imperceptible to the untrained eye." Zorak processed this. A resonance, a frequency. The implications were staggering. He had assumed that these tools were simply relics of a less advanced age, but they were more like keys that unlocked something hidden within their own technology. A sudden realization hit him, sharp and clear. The humans were using their tools not just to fix, but to hack into Eloreth technology. Every tool was like a Trojan horse, designed not to repair, but to disrupt. "They're adapting," Zorak muttered, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "This isn't just about the tools. It's the humans themselves. They can take anything, and use it to undermine us." Zero was silent for a moment, his mind processing the data. "Should we intervene? If we disrupt their toolkit, disable their tools, it could neutralize the threat." Zorak hesitated. The idea of stripping the humans of their primary source of power was tempting, but something in him resisted. He had underestimated them before, and this time, he wasn't so sure it would be as simple as removing their tools. The humans, it seemed, could turn even the most basic object into a weapon, just as they had done with the simplest of tools. "No," Zorak said, finally. "We won't disable their tools. Let them think they still control them. We'll see how long their little game lasts before they realize they've made a dangerous enemy." The Eloreth captain's gaze hardened as he turned back to watch the humans. The game had only just begun, and it was clear to him now. The humans were playing on a level the Eloreth had never considered. The tension in the command center of the Oblivion was palpable as Captain Zorak paced back and forth, his many eyes fixed on the data streams running across the holographic displays. His initial belief that the humans were merely primitive was now clearly shattered. These tools, so harmless in appearance, were becoming an unexpected thorn in the Eloreth's side. After observing Emily Rio's calm efficiency in reprogramming systems with nothing more than a wrench, Zorak had ordered a full sweep of the human station's vital areas. They would disable their defense grids, demonstrate their superiority, and crush any further signs of resistance. They would make it clear, humans are no match for the Eloreth. The Eloreth fleet began to deploy precision strikes on key infrastructure on Endurance, targeting its power grid and weapon systems. A coordinated strike, simple, devastating, meant to bring the humans to their knees. Zorak smiled grimly as he watched the attack unfold. The humans would never see it coming. But as the first wave of energy blasts cut through the station's outer defenses, something unexpected happened. On the lower levels of Endurance, Jack McAllister, a mid-level technician who had been assigned to oversee maintenance of the station's power core, was working on a conduit junction when the alarms began to blare. He looked up at the flashing red lights in surprise, his eyes narrowing as he heard the heavy thrum of the Eloreth's weapons pounding the station's hull. "They're attacking," Jack muttered, instinctively reaching for his toolkit. He always kept it close, never knew when something would go wrong. The wrench, the spanner, the pliers, they were his tools for survival, not just for fixing things. A jolt ran through the station, and Jack's eyes snapped to the main console, where a warning flashed. Critical energy fluctuation detected. The Eloreth had already triggered a feedback loop in the power grid. If it wasn't stopped soon, the reactor would overheat and breach, taking the entire station with it. His heart racing, Jack grabbed a nearby crowbar. Thinking quickly, there was no time for elaborate fixes. He dashed toward the main reactor control panel, using the crowbar to pry open a reinforced door to the power vault. Inside, a dozen Eloreth soldiers were attempting to deactivate the reactor's fail-safes with their advanced tech, but they were too slow. Jack's eyes fell on a simple, old-fashioned fuse box. In a split-second decision, he grabbed a bundle of electrical wiring and rerouted the power directly into the overheating reactor. A massive surge of energy coursed through the station's core, triggering an electromagnetic pulse that knocked out the Eloreth's weapon systems and sent their control panels into chaotic overdrive. The Eloreth soldiers were momentarily paralyzed, their weapons and devices short-circuiting in the blink of an eye. "Gotcha," Jack muttered, stepping back, his toolkit still at his side, untouched by the chaos. Back on the Oblivion, Zorek's eyes widened as his screens flashed red. "What is happening?" "Our systems are malfunctioning." Zero, who had been monitoring the attack, immediately spoke up. "It's the humans. They've turned the station's power grid into a weapon. They're tools, they're not just for fixing. They're actively sabotaging us. The EMP pulse they just triggered is scrambling our equipment." Zorek slammed his fist onto the console, the frustration evident in every motion. This wasn't part of the plan. The humans weren't just using their tools to defend themselves. They were adapting them into weapons, hacking their systems, taking advantage of every weakness in their attack. Zorek realized too late that the simple toolkit hanging from Jack's belt wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon capable of reshaping the battlefield. And the humans, it seemed, had only just begun. Captain Zorek stood at the helm of the Oblivion, seething with rage. The attack was supposed to be a demonstration of their power, one that would leave humanity trembling at their feet. Instead, the humans had turned the tables. The electromagnetic pulse that Jack McAllister had triggered had wreaked havoc across the Eloreth fleet. Their weapon systems were offline. Their communication network was a tangled mess of scrambled signals. The Oblivion's main console, which should have been displaying data on their successful conquest, now flickered erratically, its once perfect precision disrupted by the humans' unthinkable use of primitive tools. Zorak had been caught off guard. The humans were no longer just survivors. They were adapting, and they were using the very things the Eloreth had dismissed as irrelevant. Wrenches, wires, electrical components. Basic technology that had no place in modern warfare, at least in the eyes of the invaders. "They've turned our weapons into scrap," Zero said, his voice clipped. "They're using their tools not just to repair, but to reprogram. They've injected their frequency into our systems, exploiting the exact vulnerabilities we never thought to look for." Zorek's four eyes narrowed. "I want them neutralized. Now." Zero hesitated before responding. "We cannot afford to underestimate them, Captain. Every time we think we've figured out their strategy, they improvise. Their tools may be basic, but their ability to adapt is beyond anything we've encountered." Zorek's claws dug into the control panel. This cannot continue. The Eloreth were conquerors. They were born to destroy, not to be thwarted by the actions of a race that still relied on analog systems. But now, every time the Eloreth sent a surge of energy toward endurance, it was redirected. Every time they launched a precision strike, it was sabotage. The humans' tools were doing more than just blocking them. They were rewriting the rules of the game. Back on the station, as the Eloreth regrouped and prepared for another assault, Jack McAllister stood with his fellow engineers in the heart of Endurance's command center. The EMP pulse had temporarily disabled the Eloreth's weapons, but Jack knew they wouldn't stay down for long. The alien invaders were learning, adapting just like the humans had. If they didn't act fast, the station would fall. "We need to get ahead of this," Jack said, pacing in front of the Emergency War Council. "Their tech is advanced, but they rely on precision. If we keep disrupting that, they'll never get a clean shot at us." Emily Rios, who had been watching the data feeds, stepped forward with a determined look. I have an idea. A way to use their own systems against them. What do you mean? Jack asked, his brow furrowed. Emily motioned to her toolkit, which lay on the table beside her, a reminder of how far humanity had come despite their limited resources. We need to build a counter-signal, something that taps into the exact frequency they're using to communicate. Their fleet is interconnected. If we send a signal that mimics their own tech, we can hijack their systems. Hijack their systems, Jack echoed. How? We'll use our tools, she said simply. Wires, connectors, transistors. They may have advanced hardware, but we have something they don't. Ingenuity. Jack looked at her toolkit with a new sense of awe. What the Eloreth saw as primitive was becoming humanity's greatest weapon. The simplest objects meant for repairing and maintaining, were now weapons of disruption. Let's do it, Jack said, as he grabbed his own toolkit, ready to fight back. Outside, the Eloreth fleet was preparing for their next strike. But the humans were ready. They had turned their tools into weapons, and they weren't about to stop. Zorak's fury was palpable as he watched the Eloreth fleet flounder in disarray. Their own weapons had turned against them, their energy shields destabilizing, and their command systems erratically shifting frequencies. The humans had no advanced technology to match the Eloreths. They had something far more dangerous: the ability to adapt. Captain, Zero said, his voice tense, their signal is amplifying. It's spreading. If we don't act quickly, it could disrupt the entire fleet's command structure. We could lose everything. Zorak slammed his fist down on the console, sending sparks flying from the panel. I am not going to be outwitted by a primitive species with a toolbox. He turned to Zero. Send the ground forces to the surface of Endurance. We'll take their station directly. We'll show them the power of the Eloreth, and we'll wipe this insult from the stars. Zero hesitated, eyes flicking to the chaotic displays around him. Are you certain, Captain? The humans. They might be expecting this. We've underestimated them before. Zorak's gaze hardened. We can't afford to give them any more time. We crush them now, or we risk losing the war. Meanwhile, on Endurance, Emily Rios and Jack McAllister stood in the heart of the command center, surrounded by a dozen engineers working in a feverish frenzy. The humans were running out of time. Zorak's ground assault was imminent, and the Eloreth's technology was starting to stabilize, slowly recovering from the disruption. We need to take this one step further, Emily said, her voice low but resolute. If we don't disrupt their fleet's ground assault, we're finished. What do you have in mind? Jack asked, wiping sweat from his forehead as he scanned the monitors. He could see the ground forces beginning to deploy. Massive Eloreth warships were descending toward Endurance's surface, their landing craft preparing to unload soldiers. Emily glanced down at her toolkit, and then to the workbenches scattered across the room. She had an idea. We're going to weaponize their own technology. I need every wrench, every circuit board, every piece of wire we can find. We're going to build something that turns their own technology against them on the ground. Jack's heart skipped a beat. You're talking about hacking their weapons, down there on their turf. Emily gave him a grim smile. Exactly. We'll use their own ground forces systems to block their way. They'll think they're being attacked by a full counteroffensive, just enough to slow them down and give us time to reestablish control of Endurance. The engineers got to work, rapidly assembling an improvised countermeasure. Emily's mind raced through the problem. The Eloreth soldiers used advanced suits, military-grade armor powered by highly regulated energy sources. It would take more than a basic hack to disable their systems. But if they could reroute their energy, create false readings, force a malfunction, the Eloreth ground forces would be forced to retreat, at least long enough for the humans to launch their own counteroffensive. In the meantime, the ground forces of the Eloreth were closing in. Their sleek, armored landing craft hovered just above *Endurance* surface, and their soldiers, massive and imposing, began to drop from the ships in coordinated formations. Zorek's troops were preparing to storm the station's lower levels, to seize control, and to extinguish the last vestiges of human resistance. But what the Eloreth hadn't anticipated was the fury of the human spirit, focused through nothing more than simple tools, transformed into weapons of extraordinary potential. As the Eloreth soldiers moved through the station's corridors, they were unaware of the trap slowly closing in around them. The first sign of trouble came when their power armor systems suddenly began to malfunction. Energy shields flickered, ammunition systems froze, and communications went dead. The Eloreth were walking straight into an ambush, and they didn't even know it. The humans had turned the simplest objects, screwdrivers, wires, even a basic multimeter, into tools of sabotage, hacking into the Eloreth's very military systems. And for the first time, the Eloreth were the ones who were caught off guard. As the Eloreth soldiers advanced through the corridors of endurance, they were met with confusion and malfunction. Their armor systems, once sleek and impervious, now sputtered and faltered. Energy shields flickered in and out of existence. Weapon systems locked up. Their EUDs, once sharp and precise, now displayed nothing but garbled static. "What's happening?" One of the soldiers growled, his voice coming through garbled comms. "This is impossible." Another snapped. "Our systems are going haywire. It's like someone's hijacked them." And that was exactly what had happened. On the command deck, Emily Rios and Jack McAllister watched as the Eloreth troops stumbled, their once formidable assault faltering as the makeshift disruptors created havoc within their ranks. The humans had turned their simple tools into an intricate network of sabotage devices, each one designed to exploit the very weaknesses in the Eloreth's technology they had so arrogantly overlooked. "They're getting disoriented," Jack said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "We're actually holding them off." Emily's eyes were fixed on the feed, her focus unwavering. "It's not over yet. They'll adapt, just like they always do. We need to keep pushing." Below, the Eloreth soldiers were struggling. They had been sent in as an elite force, their advanced technology meant to crush any resistance within minutes. But now they were moving in a disjointed mess, suit systems scrambling to recalibrate, energy weapons misfiring, and communication lines completely down. "Captain Zorek," Zero's voice crackled through the communication line. "The ground troops are compromised. The humans, they've hacked into our armor. Their tools, they've turned our own technology against us." Zorek's fury was palpable, his eyes narrowing. "I don't care what they've done. They will not win. Prepare the assault units. We will not be delayed by a toolkit." He stormed out of the command room, his mind racing with plans for a more direct confrontation. But as he passed through the hallway, his thoughts were interrupted by another report. "Captain," a soldier said, breathless, "the shield grid is failing. We can't maintain our position. There's an internal power failure." "No," Zorek snapped, his temper flaring. "They cannot keep doing this. Zero, do you have a solution?" Zero, ever the calm and calculating officer, paused before answering. "Our systems are still recovering, Captain. But their interference is direct. It's as if they've found every weak spot. The tools they're using, it's not just sabotage, it's precise hacking, Captain." Zorek's mind raced. The humans weren't just responding with desperation. They were calculating each move. They had used their basic tools to find vulnerabilities, and now they were exploiting them with ruthless efficiency. Back on Endurance, Emily and Jack weren't resting. "They're going to come at us harder now," Jack said, grimly. This was just the first wave. Emily nodded, turning to her team. "We've got one shot at this. If we can keep them disoriented for long enough, we can hit their command center. We need to get to their core systems and lock them out. If we break their link to the fleet, they won't be able to coordinate." "Let's make it count," Jack said. With a collective breath, the team moved into position. Emily had no illusions. This would be their most dangerous move yet. The Elorith wouldn't fall easily, but the humans weren't backing down. Every wrench, every wire, every bit of ingenuity they had at their disposal had brought them this far, and they weren't about to let go now. On the outskirts of the station, the Elorith forces began their second wave. But the tide was shifting. With each passing moment, the humans were proving that their most powerful weapon wasn't in their technology. It was in their creativity. As the Elorith pressed forward, unaware of the trap being set for them, Emily took a steadying breath. They were about to make their final move. The air on Endurance was thick with tension as Emily Rios, Jack McAllister, and the rest of the human engineers moved swiftly through the corridors, making their way to the Elorith command center. Time was running out. The Elorith were regrouping, and their next assault would be their most brutal yet. But the humans had a weapon they had yet to unleash, a weapon the Elorith never even considered: their ingenuity. "We're almost there," Jack whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "We get into their core systems, lock them out, and it's over." Emily nodded. "We don't just lock them out. We control their systems. If we can override their command network, we can shut down their fleet for good." Their plan was bold, and the risks were enormous. The Elorith were relentless, and the humans' technology was still nowhere near a match for the invaders' advanced weapons. But the Elorith had underestimated one thing: the power of human creativity. While the aliens focused on brute force, the humans had used their most basic tools to cripple their enemies. Wrenches, wires, and screwdrivers had become instruments of war, hacking into Elorith systems and turning them against themselves. As they approached the heart of the station, the faint hum of the Elorith ground forces could be heard in the distance. The soldiers, still struggling with their malfunctioning suits, were regrouping for one final push. But they were slow, disoriented, vulnerable. Emily and Jack reached the command terminal. The glowing screens blinked in front of them, still linked to the Elorith's central control network. Emily took a deep breath, adjusting her toolkit as she prepared to connect the final device. A small, innocuous-looking adapter that would allow them to inject their counter-signal directly into the heart of the Elorith fleet's systems. "It's all on you now," Jack said, his voice low but filled with determination. With a steady hand, Emily connected the device, and the command center's monitors flickered as the counter-signal spread like wildfire across the Elorith fleet. The Elorith soldiers, still engaged in their chaotic assault, suddenly found their weapons shutting down completely. Energy shields blinked off, and plasma cannons misfired into the depths of space. "Do it now," Emily said, her voice tense. Jack moved to the next terminal, typing rapidly. With a single press of a key, he sent a command to the fleet's core systems, locking out the Elorith's ability to coordinate or direct their forces. The ground assault stalled, as the Elorith's fleet and forces went into disarray. The humans had seized control, not of technology, but of the battlefield. In the Elorith command center aboard the Oblivion, Captain Zorak watched in disbelief as his systems faltered. His fleet was scattered, communication lines severed. Every attempt to rally his forces was met with failure. "What is happening?" Zorak growled, slamming his fist into the console. "We're being shut out." Zero, his second-in-command, appeared on the screen, a mixture of confusion and fear in his voice. "Captain, it's the humans. They've overridden our systems. Our weapons, shields, and even our command network are compromised." Zorak's fury reached a boiling point. He turned to the nearest communications officer. "Prepare the retreat. Now." It was too late. The Elorith had never expected it. The humans had won. As the Elorith fleet began to retreat, their ships scattering into the darkness of space, the humans on Endurance allowed themselves a moment of victory. They had used nothing but basic tools, simple devices from a bygone era, to take down an empire. And in the process, they had shown the Elorith that it wasn't their technology that made them powerful, it was their minds. Emily stood, wiping sweat from her brow, her toolkit still clutched in her hand. She looked to Jack and smiled, a weary but triumphant grin. "We did it," she said simply. And on that day, humanity's greatest weapon was proven: the power to think, to adapt, and to fight with whatever they had at hand. End.